All right, here we go.
That's great.
Welcome to the book graveyard here. Today we're going to do a live Q&A chat. My friends Bill Cunningham and Bob Dice from the Men's Adventure Quarterly magazine. That's number one. How's it going today, fellas?
We also do the Art of Ron Lesser series together.
And the Art of Ron Lesser. You have two books of those out now.
Right. Third one we're working on.
All right, so welcome everyone to the chat.
There we go.
Great intro. I really like that intro.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Cool,
I
bro.
noticed a lot of stuff that I did, and some of it I wish I could redo, but some of that is it's color on your screen and in the book, but originally it was black and white. So and that's one of the things that we do. Just
Where did that?
Yeah, that's right. You colorize it. Why do you want to redo it? It looks great.
Well, there's some of the stuff I think I could sharpen it a little bit, or nobody is ever, as a designer, nobody is ever satisfied. You have to pry the book out of my hands, to get it off to Amazon.
All right, everyone saying hello here.
Hey, Geeks Love Dogs. Somebody else popped up there too. Nick. Before that.
Jeff, yeah.
Jeff. Hi, Jeff. Cool.
All right. So we're gonna start here by why don't you guys go ahead and tell us how you got started working together, what made you want to start the magazine, and maybe how it differs from Bob's other project.
It's that guy right there.
Well, yeah. A few weeks ago, you did a live chat with me and Wyatt Doyle, my partner on the Men's Adventure Library book series, and we had a great time. Thank you. Sometimes people get confused between those books, which include things like our two most recent, Weasels Rip My Flesh and He-Man, Bagmen, and Nymphos, which are actually new, nice, full-color hardcover editions of books we had previously published, but did them in black and white. Wyatt and I started working back in 2013 was our first book, and we've got 18 books in that series now, and they come, they're the source for those, and for Men's Adventure Quarterly is my Men's Adventure magazine collection, of which those behind are just a very small part. But after doing books with Wyatt, I got an idea that was kind of inspired by a couple things that Bill had been working on. And we hang out in some of the same Facebook groups and have similar tastes. And I noticed a couple things Bill had been working on. One was a reprint of the Mike Shane Private Eye comics, which I thought was really cool. And I liked that a lot.
Thank you.
His website. I also knew that he had been doing work for Justin Marriott, who publishes great fanzines. It has been for years. This is Paperback Fanatic, which is one of the longest running fanzines that Justin did. Unfortunately, coming to an end soon. But Justin's done some others like Men of Violence, which I think you can still get on Amazon. That was great too. And I saw Bill had been did great cover designs for his own books too. If you go to Pulp 20, and it's Pulp number 20h.com.
Yeah.
Oh, pulp20press.com.
Right.
You can see other books that Bill has done.
I'll put it in the chat.
Good. That I was very impressed by. And Justin's fanzines made me start thinking, between that and Ed Hulse, who is a maven who knows just about everything about vintage pulp magazines, which were the forerunners of men's adventure magazines. He's put out a lot of books and a series called Blood and Thunder that has articles about pulp magazines and the artists and the writers, and also reprint stories. And there was nothing quite like that in terms of fanzines, and no fanzines like Paperback Fanatic that dealt with men's adventure magazines. So I asked Bill if he'd be interested in trying to create one with me. And fortunately, he said yes.
Oftentimes, and this is a story that you'll hear quite often. If you don't find it on your shelf and you want it on your shelf, you're going to have to go make it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So Bob called me and said, "This is what I want to do," and I said, "Great, let's do something as elevated as possible to let people know, how important the men's adventure magazines were to the general pulp culture at large." And if you look at the men's adventure magazines and the themes and the artists and the writers, you'll see, paperback writers, paperback cover artists, comic book cover artists, magazine advertising artists, all that. There is a center point in all of that, and that's the men's adventure magazines. They all branched out from that. And then there's, also all the photographers and all of the models and all of the editors who played a crucial part in how the MAMs looked and how they functioned for their audience.
In the Men's Adventure Library book series, we primarily focus on reprinting stories and artwork. And we have published in some of them, like Weasels Up My Flesh. That one we included some ads and a couple of cartoons. But I wanted to work with Bill to create a magazine that gave people more of a feel of what other aspects they could find in vintage men's adventure magazines. So we put a lot, in addition to reprinting stories and cover art, interior art. We in MAQ we include old ads, we include cartoons, and then we've added another element that I kind of got from Paperback Fanatic and Ed Hulse's Blood and Thunder, and that is recruiting guest writers. And so once we have a theme, we think of people who have experience with vintage paperbacks or movies or other things that kind of fit that theme, and they go along, because men's adventure magazines were a reflection of the culture at the time. And so, for example, when we did the first one, we decided at that point, I was always a big fan of Paul Bishop, and Paul Bishop had been doing a podcast called Six Gun Justice Podcast, and he had also edited a couple of books, 52 Weeks, 52 Westerns series that I really liked. And he had also gotten involved with Wolfpack Publishing, which has been putting out a lot of Westerns that I like. And so a few years ago, when we started out, I said to Bill, how about if we start with the Western themed issue? Because in the 50s, especially, same time when there were Westerns galore on television when I was a kid. I grew up in the 50s and watched all of them, from Paladin to Have Gun Will Travel to Maverick, and all of those. Men's adventure magazines had lots of Western stories. So we put together the first issue, and I asked Paul Bishop if he would write an introduction for us, which he did. Thanks again, Paul. And that was our first guest writer. Since then, we keep adding more, and we're going to recruit you at some point too, Nick. We'll figure out what the next MAQ issue is. And I think that's added another whole element. In the Private Eyes issue, which is the latest one, issue number 12,
on sale now.
On sale now. In the Private Eye issue, we've got a book bonus version of a novel by Mike Avallone, and we happen to know his son David, who's also a writer. We asked him if he would do an intro for us, and he did. And also David Spencer, who published a book called The Novelizers and knew Michael Avallone, asked him if he'd write something about Avallone, which he did. And then we also asked James Reasoner if he would do an article about detectives in Westerns, because this issue, the MAQ 12, is Private Eyes issue. It's all detective and private eye stories from Men's Adventure magazines. So we got James Reasoner, award-winning novelist, to do an article about vintage paperbacks that feature detectives. And we got Paul Bishop to do an article about, based on his recent book, 52 Weeks, 52 Sherlock Holmes novels. And we also got John Harrison, who is a movie maven, to write an article about movies, vintage movies featuring detectives in science fiction movies that had detectives. And so, now that filled up nicely, 160 pages. And we also, as usual, add our cheesecake sections. We call the Bill named it the gallery.
The gallery.
Thank you, gallery. Yeah. And Bill puts together really cool articles featuring women. In this case, Anne Francis, who was Honey West detective. And so that combination of all those different elements has created something that I think is really special and unique, and hope to keep going a long time. I'm 75, so I don't know how many more years, but see.
Don't talk that way, Bob.
Yeah, we don't want to hear that. What we set out to do at the outset was to recreate the Men's Adventure magazine experience. Just as Bob said, we added the cartoons, we added the weird advertising, all the articles and the stories and whatnot. But what we did was we made it what I hope is better by curating it, and each issue covers a single topic, which is something that the MAMs originally didn't do. You would get a magazine and there would be war stories and Westerns and detective stories all in the same magazine. And that worked for them then. But we, thought, well, we are a quarterly, we are a journal. We do take a moment to analyze what the MAMs were, to talk about the people that put these things together, what their lives were like, what drove them, usually a paycheck, to create this stuff. And what's interesting to me is, as outrageous and wild as the stories are and the artwork is, the people behind these stories are just as outrageous, just as wild, and it shows in their work. So yes, we're trying to recreate that authentic experience, only better. Better paper. We're adding color. Bob resets all the type that he scans off the magazines, and we make it a little larger than it originally was, so it's easier to read. it's crisp and clean and just a better reading experience than what the original was.
Well,
Oh,
we also had introductions about the authors and the artists and the magazines to put everything into context, because it's not a scholarly journal, okay, but we do take it seriously. I mean, we feel we are. I use the term pulp culture historians, which I think I got from Andrew Nettie, the novelist editor. He's done some great books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he has great nonfiction collections on vintage paperback genre fiction. Yeah, you guys, you answered my first question, which was I was wondering if when you started the decision to make each issue have a theme or make it more like the original magazines were, which you already answered. And I was also curious is if when you were kicking around the idea of starting the magazine, if there was ever any conversation about having new stories, new art, or was it all just from the beginning? We're just going to have the original stuff from back in the day.
Well, I think we decided to focus on the pulp culture history, basically.
Yeah.
I do get asked often by writers, and we know a lot of them who write action, adventure, westerns, things like that. If we take new stories, I would say I haven't talked to Bill about it lately. We haven't so far, but I wouldn't totally rule it out in sometime in the future.
Yeah, it would have to be an exceptional story that really, really nails the tone of a men's adventure tale. That's hard to do, especially in the spaces allotted. And, you'll notice in almost all of the stories, the writers write in a very active voice. And that is hard to nail because many writers write in the third person and in a passive voice. And
Hi, Joel.
it takes you right out of the story. So, we want to get people involved in the stories. I mean, in this issue, you're not going to top a story like Walter Kalin's "I had to amputate my leg to save my life."
Yeah, right.
And
yeah. And the thing is, if they did it now, I feel like it's too self-aware.
Right.
So it'd be hard for it to come off with the same feel of it,
Right. We just.
Yeah, I knew Walter.
Well, YouTube don't hurt us. But, it's a terrific story. It's very straightforward. It's an active voice. It's everything you want in a PI story, only more.
That's Walter. I knew Walter when he was alive. Died in 2018, as I recall.
Yeah, there's an intensity there that just isn't matched by today's writers, and that's nothing against them. Times have changed, and as you said, self-awareness.
Well, it would be kind of a different thing too if we were doing new stories. There are magazines out there that are publishing new stories by action, adventure, and thriller, and detective, and western writers.
Right.
Kind of a different thing. But
yeah,
I don't know what our next theme is going to be, but I like. We've been recruiting more and more people to get involved, and whatever our next one is, Nick, I think we'll try to recruit you to contribute something. In 13, we're going to have several different people, but that one's almost put to bed at this point. If you have ideas, let us know. Issue 13, I got the idea for it from one of the writers who used to work for Men's Adventure magazines. His name is Donald Honig, Nohig, and Honig, 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 and started out writing for Hitchcock magazine. He did a bunch of novels that are really good, and then he wrote for some of the men's magazines like Rogue and also men's adventure magazines. And he went on after they sort of died away, men's adventure magazines died away. He became a popular baseball historian and wrote a whole series of baseball history novels. I happened to find out Don was still alive, and we contacted him a couple of years ago. We published a couple of his stories in issues of men's adventure magazines. He's a great writer.
Mm-hmm.
He and I were chatting, and he said, how about a theme of femme fatales? And of course, there's a lot of stories in men's adventure magazines about femme fatales. And I ran it by Bill, and he came up with an even better idea, which was fatal femmes. That women were the killers in the story. And so that's going to be the next theme.
I think that's cool to not just go with like, oh, here's the like a basic genre, I guess, because eventually you're going to run out of genres, but to come up with a creative way to group them together.
It's almost impossible to run out. I'll tell you, there's so many different kinds of stories in men's adventure magazines.
We came up with, you had a list, and I think we had almost 40 different story types of, from the men's adventure magazines. So I don't think we're going to run out anytime soon. We're only on issue 12.
Well, actually, I have more than that. I have on my computer. I store away scans and I file them in folders by title. Like Westerns is one, World War II, Korean War, World War One. There are probably about 150 different folders that I put stories into. I don't think we'll get that far with MAQ, but it's almost impossible to run out of themes.
I'm voting for fight stories. I've said it before. I want to see those fight stories, Bob.
Well,
in fact, if you guys are watching in the comments, put in your ideas. What do you guys got? What do you want to see?
Geeks Love Dogs says creature features or sports stories.
Got them both. And fight stories, you mean boxing, right?
Me specifically, yeah. But I mean, they could be street fights. That's fine. Any kind of fisticuffs, pugilism.
Or how about? Well, I'm sure there's a couple baseball stories or football stories in there.
There are. It's interesting that in the 50s, men's adventure magazines often had noir-style stories about boxers and other types of athletes, football, baseball. That kind of went away in the 60s, but in the 50s, there were stories about that were fiction rather than nonfiction. They had nonfiction too, but personally, I'm not that interested in nonfiction stories about football players from the 50s. But I like the noir style stories that were written about athletes and boxers. I got a whole folder full of boxing stories, and maybe that'll be the next one. I don't know. And
I'd be very happy.
Speaking of fight stories, Paul Bishop, our friend, who's been involved in MAQ, had a series of novels called the Fight Story series, as I recall. That's
Felony Fists.
But I think the name of the series was Fight Stories, wasn't it? Let's see.
But he did a series of boxing novels.
Of collections, or like he wrote them?
He edited the series.
Yeah, he edited the series. So I know there was like several of them. There was even a one by an author that took the fight scene in the recent Sherlock Holmes movie with Robert Downey Jr. And kind of expanded on that idea of Sherlock Holmes in the ring.
Oh, I got the name wrong. I misremembered. It's called the Fight Card series.
Ah, yeah.
Fight Card series is great. And then a lot of the new pulp writers who people will know if they hang out in some of the groups on Facebook and know the new pulp writers will know the authors, including Paul himself, wrote a couple of novels. I like that.
Didn't Gary Levisi have one too? Fight.
He may have.
Not sure
Didn't
about
he? Did he? Has he written anything for the MAQ?
Yes, he has.
Yeah.
He wrote on UFO paperbacks. And
That's right. Yeah.
And he's done another one, and I'm trying to think of which one it was.
Yeah, I forget. But yeah, he did a great article about UFO paperbacks for MAQ 11.
Turn back to the old.
And then Paul Bishop, who happens to be in our chat tonight, did a great article about the UFO TV show.
Jules Burt.
And Sylvia Anderson's show. And I have to admit, I was not that familiar with that show. And his article got me hooked. You can see all the episodes online on YouTube in high def. And I highly recommend it. Thanks again, Jules, for writing that article. Got me hooked on it.
Yeah. After I read that, I showed it to my wife, and we watched it on YouTube also. We got that.
Yeah, it's on.
Hey, Tim. Tim Hewitt just joined, or maybe he's been there for a while. But Heath Lawrence wrote a great novel in the Fight Card series. Okay, cool. Tim and Bill and I are working together on The Art of Ron Lesser Volume 3. We've done 2 volumes in that series now. Ron Lesser, for those of you who may not know, was one of the great paperback cover artists in the 60s and 70s. And he did literally hundreds of paperback covers back in the day. Many of which you will know if you look at this book. And Ron is still alive, still painting. We featured some of his more recent paintings in this volume 2, which we call Dangerous Dames and Cover Dolls. And these are the kind of paintings he's been doing lately. It's amazing because he decided he did a lot of Dangerous Dame style covers for paperbacks back in the 60s and 70s because sexy woman was often featured on a paperback cover back then to grab people's attention. And he noticed that those paintings from those original cover paintings were selling for quite a bit on heritage auctions and sites like those. So he said, hell, I can still do that. And so he started making new versions of Dangerous Dame style covers. He also has been doing things like modern celebrities like Wonder Woman and let's see, Catwoman. And he's also been reprinting versions of what would have been paperback covers back in the day, but these are actually new paintings. And he sells them primarily through heritage auctions and a couple of different galleries. Volume 3 that Bill and Tim Hewitt and I are working on with Ron is going to focus on his Westerns and action adventure artwork. He did a ton of Western covers. And also he did great action adventure like SOB series, which you may know.
There you go. Right as you were saying it.
Yep. Well, you'll get to see all the artwork very soon.
Not only are we going to show the covers, Ron gave me these large transparencies that he did back in the day for one of the publishers. They took his artwork in the form of these large 8x10 transparencies that you can't really see here, but he gave me all of the original artwork for the SOB series, which is I think 40 of them, and for the J.T. Edson Western novels. Those are great as well. And a lot of his other cover paintings we have the original art for, as well as the covers themselves.
Yeah, that I love that first book, and that cover, the cover art, was used for the E. Howard Hunt, the Steve Bentley series.
Right.
And right after I got that, the Ron Lester, the volume 1, I was like, and I love that series.
Oh.
I love it. And I was like, I looked it up online, and of course, it's like the most expensive one.
And that is Ron's late wife.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I even use it on my business card.
It's gorgeous. That's a gorgeous painting.
Yeah. And then
The nuts, yeah.
One of my favorites.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Dirty Missions issue.
That's another theme that's been recommended to us by several people is Nazis, and I know that there's a lot of Nazi covers out there, especially the ones with Nazis doing terrible things to women.
I just hate those guys.
Yeah, frankly, that's not my favorite subgenre of men's adventure magazines. But I like the ones where women are getting their revenge on the Nazis, and so that's one that we may do at some point.
That's good, yeah.
The bondage and torture covers actually they seem very collectible because they're so outrageous.
Yeah.
People will pay a high price for those on eBay. But the stories in those magazines are not among the best, actually.
No.
That's a subgenre of a much larger genre.
Is the story like just torture stuff? Is it just there's nothing much to it? It's just the
It's not quite that bad. They did have some competent, penny per word style writers, although they didn't get paid by the word like in pulp magazines. But they had some competent writers who were stringers for them, and they would have some kind of a plot and so forth. But they would have descriptions of the bondage and torture, and that's what the covers were based on. And the covers tend to those bondage and torture covers tend to have more outrageous stuff than you find in the actual stories.
Yeah.
But people seem to think that that's what men's adventure magazines are about, and that's really, I'd say, less than 20% of men's adventure magazines have that bondage and torture covers and stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's mostly action and adventure.
There's a lot of different things that the men's adventure magazines did in terms of the cover, but the inside is not the same. They would obviously, they would say 100% true article, or, and, the best way to tell a lie is to wrap it in the truth. So they would have some facts, and then they would spin a story based on those facts. It's really, really, you have to admire, in some cases, the shamelessness of the guys writing the stories, or drawing them, or the art directors telling the artists, hey, you got to make this bigger. You've got to make, the truck not only come off the bridge, but it's got to explode, and and they've got to have somebody half naked hanging from the truck as it's coming down into the valley below,
or a half naked woman who's got a machine gun in the truck too.
Yeah, they're going down fighting. It's that shamelessness that paid the bills every month. I mean, arguably, there wouldn't be a Marvel Comics if Martin Goodman's company, Magazine Management, hadn't had all those good-selling men's adventure magazines to prop it up while it was getting established. Again, like I said earlier, the men's adventure magazines touched all the other pulp culture of the time period.
Yeah, that was something I wanted to ask you guys about. If you could talk a little bit about the Martin Goodman's magazine company, because did you say they owned most of the magazines, right? and how it relates to Marvel. And then they did Timely and Atlas Comics. And then something that I just learned is that they were the paperback, their paperback subsidiary was the Lion Books. I didn't know that.
Yeah. I saw one quick thing.
Oh.
Musophonic Recording says, how about a bullfighting theme? And I just have to say, I'm prejudiced against bullfighting, although I really like bullfighting art. That's one of the themes I've stayed away from. Sorry about that.
I agree with you, Bob.
Magazine management is unique in the realm of men's adventure magazines to me, and actually, it kind of that was my introduction that got me into Weasel's Written My Flesh and the Men's Adventure Library series, because Wyatt Doyle, his friend Josh Allen Friedman, who's a writer and musician, his father was an editor for the magazine management men's adventure magazines, Bruce J. Friedman. And I got to know both Wyatt and Josh Allen around the same time, and we came up with the idea of doing an anthology of men's adventure magazine stories. And Josh had done a series of interviews with writers and editors who worked for magazine management, like his father, Mario Puzo, and a lot of other pretty well-known writers. And so as I looked into the history of that company, it was clear to me, that's when I started to realize that, the Nazi covers is a whole different thing than the broader realm of men's adventure magazines. And Martin Goodman, he started out doing pulps, I think as far back as the early 40s, pulp magazines. And then he started doing various kinds of magazines. It was very entrepreneurial. Publishing was very entrepreneurial back in the 30s.
That's a kind way of putting it, Bob.
Yeah.
Let's just say that by the skin of his teeth, Martin narrowly avoided going to court several times because of certain stories that came in, and he used anyway without paying the writer.
Yeah. And he wasn't alone. I mean,
he was not alone.
The whole business of editing and publishing magazines and paperbacks back in the 40s and the 50s, it was like the Wild West of publishing. And Goodman, though, he had really good taste in both writers and artists. And, he hired some great editors like Bruce J. Friedman, who went on to become a world famous short story writer, novelist, playwright, and screenwriter. And with him, Mario Puzo, Walter Kalin, guys like that, they created men's adventure magazines in the 50s that are truly great. I mean, they're stories written by pros. These guys were pro writers. And he also, they published stories by many other writers who were publishing novels, and they would do book bonus versions of their stories. Like the one that we've got in MAQ 12 by Michael Avalone was first published, and as I recall, was Ken for Men. Oh no, that's Frank Kane. Sorry, Frank Kane. This is one of the stories in MAQ 12 too, and Ken for Men was one of one of the stories in MAQ 12.
And it was first published as a book called The Tall Dolores.
Right. And so I noticed that magazine management also did a lot of book bonus stories by people like Robert Silverberg, Lawrence Block, many other great writers. They also had some of the top artists like Mort Kunstler and something my mind's going blank. There's a whole long list. Mort Kunstler,
Rudy Nappy,
Al Prayer, Rudy Nappy,
Earl Norem,
George Gross, Earl Norem. Anyway, I got deep into magazine management. And as you said, they started publishing comics around the same time too. I think it was Atlas, and then called Timely, and then called Marvel. They created Lion books for paperbacks, and then they created men's adventure magazines. And we've been mining those a lot in the Men's Adventure Quarterly. And I highly recommend, looking into some of the Lion books paperbacks too, for you folks who are into vintage paperbacks. A lot of them are really great.
Yeah, I have a few.
And there's really sort of an all in the family atmosphere within magazine management and Marvel, because you have a lot of crossover between, guys like Earl Norem, who would be doing illustrations for the men's adventure magazines. And when those went downhill a little bit, Martin would take him over to the other side of the house to Marvel and say, okay, we have our black and white comic magazines. I want Earl to do covers for those, because we know we can do them. We know we can deliver. And, who's not going to love Earl Norem's Conan or,
Mm-hmm.
So
Earl's interesting because he's one of the few artists who did a crossover with Marvel.
yeah.
Most of the other artists didn't work for Marvel Comics, or the writers either. It was sort of separate in most cases.
They didn't want to take the pay cut.
I think that's probably it.
They were making too much money with magazine management and whatnot. Earl's also, he did a ton of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe artwork for the toy boxes and for the promotional stuff. A lot of that stuff was released in Europe first. So just a fantastic artist who, you give him an assignment, he's going to deliver something really cool.
Another one of my favorites is George Gross. We featured one of his covers on MAQ 9, which was our Croc Attack issue. It's got some great killer crocodile stories. And this one, this is by Robert Edmund Alter, who is a writer who deserves wider recognition. He died early. It's another one, though, that comes from a magazine management magazine, Mail. And I know, Nick, if you're into Robert Edmund Alter, but I highly recommend him. And this one's called Gator Ground. It's a great story. All of the stories in there are great, actually, I think.
Well, you picked them, right?
True, that we do curate our stories. And I would say we pick the cream of the crop. You can go through, there are 160 different men's adventure magazines. I would say, maybe 25% of those are sort of low end, poorly edited issues that they aren't great writers. You don't get the kind of great writers you get in magazine management magazines or some of the other ones like True or Argosy. They had great writers and artists. But, about 25%, the artwork sometimes, the cover art is the coolest thing about them. They got another 25% or so at the top, True and Argosy and Saga. Those are great magazines. And those were read by, 1 million, 2 million readers annually. The middle ground, this is where men's adventure, where magazine management comes in. Magazine management and several other companies were sort of in the middle. And they had readership in the hundreds of thousands. They didn't pay as well as True and Argosy, so they didn't get a lot of the writers who were on the New York Times bestseller list, but they got great writers and were mining their stories a lot in MAQ.
So would you say that the interior artwork, how good it is relative to how good the magazine is in general?
Yeah, that bottom 25%, the ones that often have the wild Nazi covers and biker covers and stuff like. The covers sometimes are great. I get great artists. Sometimes like Basil Gogos did covers for them, and Will Halsey. And there were a number of artists who did great covers for those. But the inside is generally low quality paper, black and white, and the interior illustrations are okay, but they aren't usually printed very well.
Yeah.
You got to get
some of the ones I found are just photographs too. They just use a lot of like stock footage. You can tell they just grabbed it from somewhere.
Or they will, grab 2 or 3 guys out of the editorial pool, take them into an alleyway and shoot a couple pictures, you hold the gun, threaten him, and you lay on the ground like you've already been shot, that sort of thing. And, and that again goes to that shameless quality, let's get it done attitude, and which is, our readers expect us to have a certain level of sizzle to our steak, so let's deliver it.
Bob's leaving.
I'll be back. I'm gonna get something to show you. I'll be right back.
Okay. So yeah, there we go. Norm's art for the Conan mags is sick.
Yes, it is sick. His He-Man stuff is just as good, as well as his G.I. Joe stuff. If you haven't seen that, there's several art books out there with his artwork in it, and they're just phenomenal. They look like the toys, but they look real.
Did he do it for the comic books?
No, I don't think he did. I think that most of that was handled in-house through Marvel, and that was, guys that I can't think of who were the artists on that. I know, what's the writer's name? An Asian gentleman.
Oh yeah. My friend was just discussing that with me, and I forget his name too.
Yeah,
because he just had him at a signing in Forbidden Planet in New York.
Oh, okay. And I apologize for forgetting his name, but he was someone who, everybody was, how can you write a comic like G.I. Joe? And he was laughing all the way to the bank because that was a licensed comic, and he got, Larry Hama, thank you. Check yourself. Appreciate it. I need my outboard brain to
there's so much stuff to remember. It's impossible.
So much stuff, But Larry Hama, was an artist who became a writer because he was better at it, and he was one of these guys that just, he was a working writer, and every month he turned in a really great G.I. Joe story that hit all the beats that you would want in a G.I. Joe story.
Mm-hmm.
And working with, a licensor like Hasbro or Mattel or whoever it was, I think it was Hasbro, you have a lot of restrictions on what you cannot show in the comic. But, and there's also things that are in the comic that have made their way into the toy line and made their way into the cartoon show. So it's really a very fine line to navigate. And Larry was one of those guys who did that very well.
Going back to the low end magazines, the common term for them is sweat mags. There are some people who use that term for all men's adventure magazines. I use it for sort of like the lower 25% that had sort of low quality in terms of the production value, didn't have some of the best writers or artists, except for some of the covers. Like, for example, here's one. You probably never heard of Man's Best unless you're into men's adventure magazines. But this is one of the sweat mag subgenre magazines. The cover there is by Mel Craer, who is actually
Mel Craer,
a great artist, and he did many different paperback covers. but he also did Men's Adventure magazine covers. You look at the inside, and here's one of the other things they did. So here's an example of a story. Soft flesh, the jungle king. Okay, so they use a stock photo of an elephant.
Mm-hmm.
Photo, I mean, this illustration, they stole from another Men's Adventure magazine. It's ripped off. Okay,
Yeah.
They just reprinted something they got from another Men's Adventure magazine with no credit, no payment, etc. That was the low end of the spectrum. But they did have cover art.
Yes. Hey, since you showed that reminded me. I wanted to hear Bill talk about colorizing those black and white images.
Sure. A lot of times, the interiors for the Men's Adventure magazines were obviously black and white. That's a budgetary issue. Very rarely is an aesthetic issue. And part of our mandate, I've always thought, is to deliver an authentic experience, only better. So there's several ways that we do that. In many cases, we have found artwork, original artwork that was scanned through heritage auctions and other sites that's of high resolution enough to where we can use it in the magazine, and do it textless so we can recreate everything and make it fit our magazine. Let me pull up a piece that we did for Croc Attack on there it is.
While you're pulling that up, I'll show another example. This Party Goal story by Frank Kane has an illustration by Rudy Nappy. Frank Kane was one of the great detective story writers. Rudy Nappy was a great illustrator. That model happens to be my friend Ava Lind, who is still alive. This is what it became in Men's Adventure Quarterly 12, because Bill knows how to do it. That's one of the elements, many elements Bill has added to what we do. He is an incredible graphic designer, and I have to say, almost every page in the Men's Adventure Quarterly shows Bill's talent as a designer. There's a Croc Attack issue.
Yeah. Now, this was originally a black and white illustration that I colored in Photoshop as best I could with that version of Photoshop. They've done a couple other ones since then. But you'll see that, it's the same illustration, only in color. Again, we took a black and white photo here. You can see my cursor on the screen, and made her orange. There's just a bunch, since Amazon has really good color reproduction, it would be a shame not to use it to its best effect. In many cases, what I do is, like this lady here, I will take this and then I will, extend the background and make it fit the entire spread of pages. And from there, we will go and layer other covers on it. There we go. And there's also sorts of things going on. Bob finds some great covers, some other things. Now, this was the one I'm pointing at right now. This was originally in a two-color, black, white, and orange in the magazine, which was probably a little more expensive for them to do. And again, this was a black and white illustration that I colored.
That's a great story, by the way. Avenging Crocodile is like a Twilight Zone story.
Let me go to the
Well,
page
the cover there.
that has our work on it. Yeah, again, this is another one that I colored and added the blood splatter and redid the title font because it's no longer in use.
Yeah, those little touches that Bill does, when you pick up on it, it's really amazing. Here's one of our gallery articles that Bill put together, showing.
Now this was a black and white photograph that I colored, and I'm trying to find the. This is a rather large file, so it jitters a little bit.
An article by our friend
John Harrison.
John Harrison about Crocodile Attack movies, Croc and Gator movies.
I love that you guys throw the movie culture in with the theme.
A real overlap between magazines and what was happening on TV and at the movies.
This was a different looking page. The black area that you see here was white in the original magazine, and it just didn't seem to fit. So I made it black and made part of the title treatment red to, kind of signify blood without being so obvious about it. Again, here is the, let me get that up. Oh, geez, sorry. That just, my mouse just zipped away from me. Here we go. Yes, okay. Now.
The sausage is made, yeah.
Yeah, how the sausage is made.
The crocodile sausage in this case.
Yeah, in this issue, we had a lot of color work to do. Primarily because I just couldn't see doing it in black and white. Now you'll notice, like here on the Avenging Crocodile, the original MAM version was a very blocky, like a Babus New font. And then I said, well, that doesn't have enough energy in it. So we added color to the image, and I made the font more like scratches. In the original MAM version of Give Me Back My Arm,
a classic.
Yeah, I just set title off with red, and then I took this black and white illustration here was from a cover, and I found the original cover and made it, just substitute the original color cover back in. In this one, Gator Ground, which was a great story. I recolored the whole thing. And go over here, My Bloody Battle with a Croc. Again, this was the interior illustration taken from the cover. So I just went back in and got the cover and put it in and changed the title slightly so that we could emphasize the word bloody. Call me shameless. I'll take it. I'm a little shameless when it comes to that kind of stuff.
There's a reason they did it in the first place.
Yeah. And they only had so much in the budget, and they had to keep most of the magazine black and white. So I don't fault them for that. Another thing is, we had this. I found the original color, or I colorized that. I can't remember which. And here I colorized the blood for the crocodile, made the title treatment a little larger. My hand to jaw death duel with a croc.
And a great illustration by Bruce Minnie in that case.
Oh yeah, Bruce Minnie did everything, man. He was it. because now you'll notice slightly that the original magazine versions is more like an 8.5 by 11 format, and we are an 8 by 10 format. So sometimes I have to squeeze things down a little bit and do it and to fit it in properly and make it look good without having to put a white border around everything and letting people know that oh yeah, you just grabbed a page and put it in there. So that sometimes necessitates me making that change. Again, it's all in service to the reader. We want the reader to be able to read the text very clearly and enjoy the story. That's why we reset all the type. Now whether that experience is either in the black and white versions of the magazine, which we have, we call them the noir versions, or the Kindle digital replica version, which is just like the color print version, only digital.
Yeah, there are some people who like the noir version, the black and white version. It costs a couple bucks less, and not much.
So
that story there with the Jap in the Croc's mouth, I would just say that's an example of how men's adventure magazines took something that was true and turned it into something over the top. That story is about the Battle of Ramree Island in World War II. It was a real battle. It's in the Guinness Book of World Records for the most human fatalities in a Croc Attack. And what happened was the Japs had dug in on that island, Japanese, excuse me, and so when the American forces came in, they pushed them to the interior of the island, and the Japanese troops retreated, and they retreated into a swamp that was full of hungry crocodiles, and literally dozens and maybe more than 100 or more Japanese soldiers were eaten by the crocs. The story is based on truth, but it's written sort of as fiction, and it's a really engrossing story. I think it's a really fun story. It's pretty amazing.
I mean, it's people, a large group of people being eaten by crocodiles. What's not to love about it?
Oh, the other thing in that one, in that article, we have an article by Andrew Nettie about Australian magazines, men's magazines down under, page 42. Okay.
all right.
And Andrew Nettie is a pulp culture writer and editor in Australia, and he's written. Oh, there's the article. He's written a couple of great. He's edited several great books about vintage paperbacks. My favorite being one about gang girls, and one of the things I learned, correspondence with Andrew and some of my own research, is that men's adventure magazines existed in Australia too.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them actually took stories and artwork from American men's adventure magazines and used those. In some cases, they had their own writers and artists. And he wrote an article about men's adventure magazines in Australia that is really cool and very interesting.
They imported the stories, not the magazines themselves, and adapted their stuff to the Australian market and developed their own MAMs, Adam and some of the others. And you'll see here, you have Man's Life, the original magazine, and then you have, or I can't tell which one is.
Actually, in that case, Real Combat was the American magazine.
Oh, okay.
Man's Life was the Australian version, but they stole the title from the the American magazine called Man's Life.
So yeah, it really goes to show you that pulp and pulp culture is international. There's a lot of the same themes, a lot of the same emotions in the prose, but it has a different flavor. So it's very interesting in that, you know, a lot of that stuff is local, so we have never seen it, and it's a point of pride for me that we're able to bring this stuff here and at least give readers in America a taste of what it must have been like in other countries reading men's adventure magazines and paperbacks and whatnot.
I would imagine that the Australian animal attack stories are probably the best.
They're probably non-existent because they happen every day and they're probably in the local news, you know. So
yeah,
you know, why do we need a magazine about this? I see it on my news every day.
it's true.
We kid, you know. But no, there's really there's stuff that we have never seen here in the States simply because it's in another language, or the locals never thought, oh, we could export this, you know. And it's a shame, really, because I think there's a lot of American readers, or at least English-speaking readers, that would enjoy some of this stuff. You know,
Well, luckily they can buy the Men's Adventure Quarterly worldwide.
Yes,
via Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I find interesting about crossovers is in men's adventure magazines. If you look, for example, this is issue number 3. We called it our vigilante justice issue. It doesn't say that on the cover, but that was basically the theme: vigilante justice. And one of the writers who shows up, some people will recognize from that Gil Cohen art. That's from a Don Pendleton novel. And in this issue, the vigilante justice issue, we have an introduction by Chuck Dixon, whose movie about Levin is a big hit right now. What's his last name? Levin Cade, right?
Yeah.
That Levin Cade movie just came out recently. Chuck, anyway, wrote an article for us about vigilante justice stories. And in this issue, we include 2 book bonus stories by Don Pendleton, which were 2 Mac Bolan executioner stories that appeared in men's adventure magazines as book bonuses. And at the time, Linda Pendleton was still alive, and she gave us permission to reprint these 2 stories. They were the first 2 executioner novels in book bonus form, printed in another magazine, Management Mag. That was the first one. We also got, for that issue, Linda wrote an article about it, the evolution of the Executioner series for us. That's really cool. And we have a gallery of Gil Cohen artwork for the Executioner. And Gil is still around. In fact, Wyatt Doyle and I published a book featuring his Executioner cover art. But that's another example of how men's adventure magazines and other genres in the culture at the time were overlapping, because men's adventure magazines were reprinting Don Pendleton executioner stories, and we reprinted them in MAQ.
By the way, everyone, you can ask questions and stuff, and we'll pick some to answer. Levi's got a question for you. How often do you come across a story that you step back and say, okay, this one is too vile to reprint?
Not many.
I was going to say, yeah, that's one of the factors we look for.
It depends on what you think of as vile. You know, there's often a lot of violence and blood, and the cover of the the vigilante justice issue,
yeah,
a really cool one.
And that's an Earl Norem, by the way.
An Earl Norem cover with the guy's leg getting shot off. Of course, if you read the story, you find out his leg had already been shot off. That was, as I recall, that was
it's a partial limb getting shot off.
But I don't mind death, blood, violence, or even sex. And when it comes to animal attack stories, that's another type of fantasy. Most of the time, what I like about animal attack stories is it's sort of the revenge of the animals because they're killing and maiming the humans. But of course, sometimes the animals get killed too, which I don't really like that part of it. I'm not into hunting and killing animals, but it was part of the genre. I guess, there's lots of aspects of men's adventure magazines that are racist, sexist, etc., when looked at by today's standards. And there may occasionally there may be something that I think is too racist or maybe too sexist to put in the MAQ, but there aren't many.
I think it's when it's on purpose is the issue. When someone's writing something that's offensive on purpose, and you can tell that it's on purpose, that's when there's an issue. When it's back at the time, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know no better at the time. I think there's a difference.
Well,
that's how I kind of.
And it's of its era. I mean, if you look at the Vietnam War issue that we did, which is MAQ number 10, okay, that was another Bruce Mini cover, isn't it? As I recall, Bill.
Yeah, I think so.
No.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
And I know that's Steve Holland. Who is that? Who did that cover? I forget. I'm pretty sure it's Bruce Mini, though, I think. But the Vietnam issue, okay, you've got stories in there that are definitely what you would call racist, okay, where they call North Vietnamese troops and the Viet Cong, they'll call them gooks and so forth. But that was of its time. I mean, if somebody reads something like that in one of our MAQs and gets their panties in a bunch, then they shouldn't be reading the MAQ. Because that's the way it was back then.
Vietnam stories.
Yeah, and it was the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
An insect spider book. Oh, that would be cool.
How about this?
I actually think we would have enough to do insects and spider attacks, amazingly.
Where is this? I think, speaking of tarantula.
Apocalyptic dystopian adventure books. We got, we came close to that. Wyatt Doyle and I just did a book a couple years ago called Atomic Werewolves and Man-Eating Plants. And that one has some dystopian, apocalyptic men's adventure magazine stories in it. We haven't done anything like that MAQ yet. But I think one of the themes we definitely will want to do eventually is science fiction for MAQ, because there was a lot of great science fiction writers, actually, whose work was either done for men's adventure magazines or were reprinted in men's adventure magazines.
Yeah, I think Stephen King got his start writing for Stag, didn't he? I think he
was writing for other men's magazines. I don't recall him writing for Stag, though.
Yeah.
Oh.
Speaking of tarantula, this is the lovely Mara Corday.
Yeah.
who was a model, actress, personality back in the day.
Yeah,
And
South Pacific theme too. We could do. I'll give you an example.
she's lovely. And this is one of the layouts featured in the MAMs.
Which episode? Which issue is that in?
This is in the UFO issue.
Oh yeah,
issue 11. It originally, these black and white images originally appeared in the August 1955 issue of Men magazine.
Somebody said South Pacific, and definitely a lot of those. There was actually one magazine that was called South Sea Stories. And it's all South Sea adventure. So, and there's a lot of other magazines too.
Middle East Sex Express. Man, just the covers alone, hilarious.
Well, there was a whole art to writing the titles for stories. Those titles for the stories were often written by the editors and the associate editors. Mario Puzo, who worked for Martin Goodman Men's Adventure magazines, and was an associate editor hired by Bruce J. Friedman back around, I think it was 1959 or so when he got hired. He spent a lot of time writing titles, headlines, and the subheads. They would have a little description of the stories in the magazine too. A subhead that sums up what the story is about in a sentence or two that's over the top. And that was one of the things he did for Men's Adventure magazines, besides writing stories under the pen name Mario Clary. But yeah, South Sea Stories we could do.
Let's see. We got
Sword and Sorcery. It's odd. There is virtually no sword and sorcery in Men's magazines. I don't know why, but there are some historic sort of fact-based fictionalized stories about Romans and knights and Vikings and things occasionally, but not real sword and sorcery stuff in Men's Adventure magazines for some reason. I don't know why.
What about this? Was there ever any of those pulp hero type stories in a Men's Adventure magazine?
I answered it in the chat, but after Korea, the audience for that sort of fiction just wasn't there anymore. And it all transitioned into the hard-boiled, two-fisted Mike Hammer type hero, very noir. And then it transitioned even further into Don Pendleton's Executioner and those kind of heroes, or anti-heroes, I should say.
One of the differences between pulp magazines, pre-World War II into the 50s pulp magazines, and the Men's Adventure magazine genre that was related to those and got started in the early 50s, is that Men's Adventure magazines don't have serialized stories or stories that feature particular characters in a sequence or often. The only time you would get the same character is if they were reprinting book bonus versions of some author and it was the same character. Like we've got an Ed Noon story by Michael Abalone in MAQ 12, the Private Eyes issue. And there are a couple other Ed Noon stories by Abalone and Men's Adventure, reprinted as book bonus stories.
Right.
Written for Men's Adventure magazine. So you don't get superheroes, mask Avengers. You don't get serialized stories over a series of issues, and you don't get recurring characters unless they happen to be recurring in a novel, and they're getting reprints of.
Well, the exception that proves the rule is what we've just reprinted in this 12th issue is the Private Eye character. They tried to bring back a recurring Private Eye character for the magazine, so that every month, like almost like Mike Shane digests or that sort of thing, they would have this character have an adventure in the magazine.
Good memory. That's the only one I know of. And we reprinted it in this issue of the Men's Adventure Quarterly, the Private Eyes issue. There was a short-lived magazine called Private Eyes. Yeah, there were 2 issues. And those 2 issues did have, they reprinted stories about a character called Adam Baxter, Private Eye. And they did a couple of those, and they did a couple of stories about a female Private Eye too. But that's about the only one I know of where they had a recurring character, and it was only for 2 issues.
So what would make that not one of the crime magazines, and what makes that more of a men's adventure?
You could probably call it crime. I don't know, though. It's not true crime. In other words, I think of the crime magazines as true crime magazines, right? They had stories about true, they're often stretched a lot, but the true detective style magazines, true crime stories, those were usually portrayed as true stories, and they were often mostly illustrated with photos inside. Private Eye, to me, is more of a men's adventure magazine because the stories inside are fictional. Half the stories are fictional. Some of the stories in it are fact-based. Like they did a couple articles about Private Eye TV shows. But maybe I'm not thinking of the magazines you're thinking of. What crime magazines had?
I just bought one, and I was curious. I wanted to ask you about it.
The digest style magazines, like Mike Shane magazine.
No, it looks like a men's adventure magazine, but it wasn't like a true crime, but it looked like a. I don't know. I thought that maybe there was a crossover.
Well, I categorize Private Eye as a men's adventure magazine, an odd one, of course. It's not. It's an atypical one.
Yeah.
But there were the Crime Digest magazines. To me, that's a separate genre. That's crime and mystery digest stories, fiction stories. I thought you were talking about the 8.5 or 8 by 10, 11.
No, it looks just like it.
Vikings issue. I'm not sure I got enough stories for Vike to do a whole issue on Vikings.
Nick, you're using my organization system. All right, let me see. Hang on,
Geeks Love Dogs is reading Atomic Werewolves. Thanks, man. That was a fun one to put together. And Levi says the Executioner, isn't that like the Destroyer? No, actually, the Destroyer was inspired by the Executioner. But I mean, Destroyer took elements of the Executioner, so it is like that. But Executioner came first.
He wanted to know about the Destroyer because we did that on yesterday's live episode. We talked about a Destroyer issue, and they were wondering how it was, if it related, how the Destroyer type story related to the original men's adventure magazines, if it was similar or not. But
I think one of the big things that thematically ties them together is that men's adventure magazines were primarily written for returning veterans, and Mac Boland was a veteran, so he was the face of all the frustration that returning veterans had in terms of looking at the world that they came back to.
Yeah, there were a lot of stories in men's adventure magazines about vets who came back and, had a hard time readjusting to civilian life. Veterans are often the main characters in stories in all kinds of situations: animal, detective, vigilante justice, things like that. Here's another one of my favorite themes: Jungle Girls. we did the Jungle Girls issue, and that's not quite South Pacific. There are some South Pacific stories in this one.
Yeah.
Isn't focused on South Pacific, but it does feature one of my favorite writers and models, Jane Dolinger, who was the only woman who was a regular contributor to men's adventure magazines. See if I can find a picture of her that isn't X-rated.
Yeah, make sure she's not naked, because I've been flagged for that before.
There you go. There's Jane with a jungle drum.
Nice.
And she would write the story, model for the story, and then later take the story and tweak it and then sell it to the tabloids too. So she was a true entrepreneur when it comes to being a working writer and model back in the day.
She's the only woman, I think, who mastered the men's adventure magazine genre.
Yeah.
She had articles in a lot of them, things like "I helped shrink a human head," and actually she did go with her husband, who was a filmmaker, to South America and did meet and live with headhunters. And again, I'm trying to find her husband, Ken Crepine, took a lot of photos of her that are racy. They're topless. Now here's some of her that aren't. They aren't topless. But this is when, after men's adventure magazines faded away, she wrote articles for the Sun tabloid, things like that. She was great. Oh, and here's the guy that showed up in your intro. That is from a Jane Dolinger story. In your introduction, you show this guy.
Yeah, to zoom in, yeah.
And that's from a Jane Dolinger story called "The Jungle Killers Who Fight for Women."
And that model there is Steve Holland.
Yeah, there's Steve, who's been lionized in a series of books by our friend Michael Stratford, which I highly recommend.
As do I, since I designed the book. And that, and I did the cover for the Steve Holland Paperback Hero book, and the expanded Steve Holland book about him posing as Doc Savage.
Geeks Love Dogs. I'm sorry to hear your story that your mom threw out all the men's adventure magazines that your grandfather had left you. Sorry about
man, that's way back there. There we go.
Yeah. My mom threw out all my comic books, which would be worth a lot. I didn't have men's adventure magazines, although I grew up in the 50s. I was born in 1950. My father had men's adventure magazines. I didn't really get into them until about 20 years ago. But I had lots of comics that would be worth something now, that my mom threw away when I went to college. Some of the worst stories are when I talked to some of the artists, like Gil Cohen. Gil Cohen, one of the great men's adventure magazine artists and paperback cover artists who did all the many of the best covers for The Executioner and its spin-offs. Gil had hundreds of men's adventure magazine paintings, and this is like in about 1970-ish. He got a divorce, and he didn't want to take all of these paintings, but they were on board that artists use. They weren't paper; they were the board, illustration board. and he had hundreds of them. Took up a lot of space, and he did two things. One is he tried to sell them in his brother's hardware store. He put them in a bin and sold them for like 10, 20 bucks. And actually you can find some of those every once in a while. They pop up on Heritage, and I bring them to his attention. He said, yeah, that's one of the ones I sold in my hardware store. And then after he sold all he thought he could sell, he burned a bunch of them. Similar story was told to me by Mort Kunstler, who one time when he and his wife took a long hiatus in Mexico, he burned a bunch of his paintings.
That's crazy. They didn't know.
They didn't know. Well, Mort did. Mort kept a lot of them, and he has been selling them since for thousands of dollars each. But men's adventure magazines were not really considered a collectible until fairly recently. There are a lot of collectors of pulp magazines, a lot of collectors of men's bachelor magazines like Playboy and so forth, but there weren't many collectors of men's adventure magazines until, I don't know, it's 15, 20 years ago when I started getting into it. And it's partly because you didn't really see them much at antique shows. There were no pulp conventions for men's adventure magazines. There were pulp conventions, and you would sometimes see men's adventure magazines there, but there weren't any conventions just for men's adventure magazine collectors. Yeah. And you didn't see them at flea markets, for example, very often, or used bookstores. And so it wasn't until eBay came along that you could actually find easy access to use men's adventure magazines. And estimates are that only about, somewhere between 1 and 10% of the men's adventure magazines that were originally published still exist. And that's why some of them are really hard to find and go for big bucks.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, Tim Hewitt and I went up to Charlotte, North Carolina this weekend to the Heroes Convention, and we saw a couple of MAMs there. They weren't in mint condition by any means, and they were going for like $15 a piece.
Well, Nick, I saw that you ran across a cache of them recently.
Yeah, I found a bunch at an antique mall. And they were in between 5 and 15, randomly priced.
Yeah.
Like some of them were just destroyed, and some were like great looking, almost brand new.
Some of the pulp conventions, there are vendors who bring men's adventure magazines, like Pulp Fest, which is coming up in early August. There are several vendors who bring men's adventure magazines for reasonable prices.
Good. I'll be there.
I'll be there too.
Here's a question for you guys.
Adventure books. Actually, I have a folder of submarine stories on my computer, because I'm fascinated by submarine stories. So that actually could be a theme at some point.
Here, what about this? Does this exist? A Christian knockoff of men's adventure magazines?
Not that I know of.
Yeah. The only thing I could think of would be some of the comics that were produced for the Christian audience. Either adaptations of the Bible stories, some of which had some great artwork by some people whose names we would recognize. And there's also the fire and brimstone little pamphlets, but I have never heard of a Christian men's adventure magazine type thing.
No, not that I know. Nor do you find much about religion at all in men's adventure magazines.
Yeah,
not
voodoo
a thing. Voodoo, yes. We could definitely do an MAQ issue on voodoo. There are lots of voodoo stories.
Yeah, my wife wants one on witchcraft. If you're taking requests,
I have a folder of witchcraft stories too.
Oh wow!
So many topics, so little time. I mean, it's amazing how long it takes to put together an issue. We try to do it quarterly. Sometimes we miss our unstated deadlines, but it takes a long time to put an issue together.
You're telling me, brother.
I escaped a Philistine harem. Well, actually, there are lots of harem stories, many of them done by Jane Dollinger, who actually stayed in the harem. But there are lots of harem stories, not Philistine harems.
Awesome. All right. Well, you guys got any more questions? We're getting close to about over an hour and a half.
Yeah. Well, let's let everybody know where they can get Men's Adventure Quarterly.
Mm-hmm.
You can get them worldwide through Amazon, either in the collector's print edition that's full color, the noir edition that's black and white, or the digital replica version, which is available on
It's a Kindle version, basically.
Yeah, Kindle version. And it's also available if you're signed up for, was it Kindle Prime or something like that?
Kindle Unlimited, I think it's called.
Yeah, something unlimited.
Yeah, then you can
read it, and we get paid by the page that you read.
You can also get them on my website, menspulpmags.com.
And we have several retailers who sell Bud Plant books, Stuart Eng, Mike Chomko books.
We get asked sometimes, do you do subscriptions? And the answer is, I wish I knew how, and I wish it was easy. And if it were, we would do it. I didn't even know how to do it. If somebody out there in the audience knows an easy way to do subscriptions and knows how to do the fulfillment and all that stuff that goes with it, let me know.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you just set up a pre-order on Amazon?
Yeah, but we're still, there still takes a long time between issues.
A real subscription would mean you sign up for, to get it for a year. I don't know any way to do that for people. They can get all the issues on Amazon easily enough.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we have no subscriptions.
And let us know also what you would like to see from us, in addition to Men's Adventure Quarterly, in terms of, do you want us to do an annual type thing? Or should we do the best of Men's Adventure Quarterly? Or, an encyclopedia of Men's Adventure covers? We're open to doing anything that explores the men's adventure world.
Come and see us on Facebook. We have a group called the Men's Adventure Quarterly Brigade, and we chat with folks on that on a daily basis.
Sure.
I would love to see a guide. I think it would be cool if you were like, maybe you could show it as like which ones were the Martin Goodwin ones, or if these titles are, considered the sweat mags, the lower tier, maybe tier section.
That's one of my long-term goals. There is an old guide to men's adventure magazines called Divine's Guide to Men's Adventure Magazines. It was put out. He printed them by hand. Okay, he typed it up, put them by hand. He sold these. Bill Devine, he's from Maine, and he went to antique shows and sold copies of Divine's Guide to Men's Adventure Magazines. You can occasionally find copies on eBay, but that's hard to find. And I thought about doing an updated version of that. There's a version of it in the book called Men's Adventure Magazines. I don't have it handy. That was put out in around 2004. It's called, I don't have it handy, sorry. It's called Men's Adventure Magazines. If you look it up on Amazon, you'll find it. And that has an updated version of Divine's Guide. And it has an introduction to men's adventure magazines by topic, almost like MAQ has different themes. It has different chapters about animal attacks and so forth. And there are 2 books like that for people who want to get into the genre. One is called Men's Adventure Magazines in Post-War America, and it was edited by Max Allan Collins. The great Max Allan Collins was one of the editors. George Hagenauer was another editor. And there are 2 editions of that one. And I'll just say, you want this one. I got to get back online here. Where am I? This was the original edition. Men's Adventure Magazine, Post-War America, edited by Max Allan Collins and George Hagenauer. This is a great, great book.
Wow.
And it was reprinted in a smaller digest size version in, I think it was 2013. And that's the version you normally find now. This one's a little harder to find.
Yeah.
But get the big 8x10 version, because this version, besides being bigger and better and really well printed, it also has a special section on Nazi mags, okay? And George Hagenauer had the only interview I've ever seen with artist Norem Eastman, who did a lot of the Nazi magazine covers for Men's Adventure magazines. That interview is in that edition. The second edition that they printed, it's Taschen Books reprinted it. When Taschen went to reprint it, I think they got a lot of heat for having Nazis in there. And so in the second edition, they took out the whole chapter on Nazi covers, and they took out the interview with Norm Eastman. So don't get that one, get the big one, the first edition.
Yeah, I know you answered it in the comments, but let's pretend for a moment that I'm totally new to the MAM genre. Who are the best writers to look out for?
Bill named some of the best right there, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are 2 types of writers who work for Men's Adventure magazines. There were the writers who were stringers who wrote for them regularly. And Bill named some of them: Don Honig, Robert F. Dorr, Mario Clary, who was actually Mario Puzo, Walter Kalin. Those are some of the best ones. But Men's Adventure magazines also had the book bonus stories by all kinds of famous writers like Don Pendleton and many, many others. Michael Abalone, the list goes on and on. Almost all of the vintage paperback writers who were big in the 50s and 60s had book bonus versions of their books published in Men's Adventure magazines. Now, they didn't write the stories for those magazines. They were abridged versions of their novels, but it was a way for them to get more publicity and more readers, increase awareness of what they were doing, and so that the list of how many great writers work for Men's Adventure magazines goes on and on.
All right.
Please spread the word. Thank you, Bill. And thank you, Nick.
Yeah.
And thanks to all you folks who came by. I appreciate it. We know some of you very well.
Yep.
Yeah. Geek Slugs Doug has a channel, and he posts it also. He posts your stuff also.
And I look forward to meeting some of you at Pulp Fest this year. So I will see you in August.
I will make this announcement. I haven't announced this yet. Unfortunately, I cannot come this year. My wife has breast cancer. She's been undergoing chemotherapy since early this year, and she's going to have surgery around the time Pulp Fest is happening. And I cannot come this year. I'll be there next year. But Bill will be there with copies of MAQ, And Wyatt Doyle will be there with copies of the Men's Adventure library books to sell and sign. They'll both be signed and copies too.
Yeah, that's sad, Bob. But everything's gonna be fine. Everything's gonna be all right.
Oh yeah.
Okay, thanks guys,
Thanks everybody.
and all you ladies there too. No, I didn't see any. Sorry. Maybe there are some.
There might be. There was some last time.
Good. We need to drag them into the Men's Adventures.
there is the she wasn't on this one, but Blue Electric Bunny. She always posts the Men's Adventure paperbacks on her Instagram, and she loves it. Yeah, so there's women who like this stuff. That's what I always try to say. Is like, it's not. I know it's called Men's Adventure. It's just action and adventure, and it's a lot of fun, and it's for everybody.
I sold more copies of the Jungle Girls issue to young ladies at the LA Paperback Show in last year than I did guys.
Good.
So yeah, there's people who like stories about strong women, and so we don't count you out, ladies. We want you to join the club and have fun with us. So
yeah. And like you said, the women are sometimes the heroes of the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna we're turning it off now. So thanks everyone coming by. Thanks Bob and Bill for coming on and doing this.
Love
it. Love hearing about it.
MICKEYMOUSE.
Everybody.